Hello, and welcome back to another Half Pint session. Today, I am joined by Bruce R. Johnson, and he's here to tell us about his book, The Undiscovered C.S. Lewis. Bruce, welcome to the show.
Thank you, David. It's good to be here. I am imbibing with PG Tips tea today.
Oh, well done, well done. It's good to know that someone's representing properly.
I try.
Well, for people who don't know you, would you mind just giving us a little bit of your own personal background and your journey, relationship to, and career with Inklings-related things?
Certainly. Well, I'm a pastor, a Presbyterian pastor, and that's been my career for 40 years. And C.S. Lewis was my favorite author when I was a teenager, and I kept on reading him. And one thing led to another. Started talking with C.S. Lewis scholars, and they said, well, it's about time we should have a C.S. Lewis Society here in Arizona, where I live, my wife's home state. And we began doing that. And lo and behold, Chris Mitchell, who was then director at the Wade Center, contacted us and says, I want to take you out to breakfast, which was very strange. And I said, you probably have the wrong person, but I'll bring along a friend of mine and I'll have breakfast with you. And they, in that breakfast, Chris Mitchell began talking to us about an idea we had to start an academic journal on C.S. Lewis. And he challenged us to step up our game, to make it more robust. And that's become Sehnsucht, the C.S. Lewis Journal. And now we're on volume 17, which will be out very shortly. And you've contributed a bit to that. So thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Yes, I wrote a review of the Ballet 5/8 adaptation of Till We Have Faces. I know it should have been Andrew, but I got there first. So
that's right. That's right.
And it was finders, keepers, losers, weepers.
Yeah. So I've been doing that. And then Chris Mitchell died unexpectedly in 2014. And when he died, I had this sense, my goodness, it's so sad he didn't live to be 70, because then all of his friends could write a tribute volume in his honor. Mm-hmm. And I kept on waiting for somebody to begin that, and realized nobody was going to begin that unless I started to squawk and ask people and invite them to do something. So the Wade Center was very kind and blessing the effort, and we got friends of his to write different chapters. And in the midst of that, I realized what we were writing, what we were putting together, actually mirrored a lecture that Chris had done in Arizona in 2008, called The Undiscovered C.S. Lewis. I said, my gosh, this really demonstrates or proves Chris Mitchell's theory. What a great tribute for him. And so that's the volume we're talking about, this tribute volume that unexpectedly really demonstrates Chris Mitchell's vision for the future of Lewis-related studies. You know, in some ways, we're in the third generation of Lewis-related studies. You can think about it that way. Lewis dies in 1963, and the first generation of Lewis scholars were Lewis scholars in his own lifetime, maybe a little bit past that when the tribute volume Light on Lewis came out, edited by Jocelyn Gibbs. And then just after that, the first letters of C.S. Lewis put together by his brother Warney, and a couple other people helped with that. And that's really the first generation of Lewis studies. And then you go to the next 40 years, that's the second generation of Lewis studies. You have all the standard biographies that come up. In that time, a lot of posthumous volumes that were put together by Walter Hooper. In 2004, the Collected Letters of C.S. Lewis, Volume 1 came out, and that really marked the beginning of the third generation of Lewis scholarship. And now we are 20 years into that. So if a generation is 40 years, we're halfway through the third generation of Lewis scholarship. So Chris had this idea of, well, where would the good new work on Lewis be done? What areas? So he identified 6 different areas. And I'm still embarrassed that we tried to record his lecture and the recording equipment failed that night. You know, I was responsible. It was done in my church, and a new sound system we thought is all perfect, and it didn't record. So it was my memory of this lecture he gave that really just stayed in my memory. I wrote it down. We began applying those principles to Sehnsucht. And now they're in this book form. So let me go through those 6 categories. Would that be helpful, David?
That would be perfect, yes.
All right. So the first category is historical studies, because Lewis is no longer a contemporary writer. He's a 20th century author, and as most of your listeners realize, we're in the 21st century. And so there are things about the 20th century that we've never experienced or have forgotten, and some good contextualization, historical contextualization is now needed to understand Lewis. The second category would be reassessments, when people look at previous ways that Lewis has been understood and perhaps misunderstood, and bring some clarity to that understanding. Third would be contemporary studies, where you're comparing Lewis to one of his contemporaries, or comparing Lewis with an earlier author. And then a fourth category would be comparing Lewis to current thoughts or current authors, comparing and contrasting, particularly postmodern theory or post-Christian studies. A fifth would be simply Lewis's lesser known material. For example, very few works have been done about Lewis's study in words that had 2 different editions, and very little academic work has been done examining that. And a sixth area would be previously unpublished C.S. Lewis material, or now we may add rediscovered Lewis material that was published during his lifetime, but everybody had forgotten about it, like his Christmas Sermon for Pagans would be an example of that. So Chris Mitchell's theory was those are the 6 categories where good work will be done. And besides that, you have now new authors that are writing on Lewis that don't know any of the previous scholarship that's been done in the first and second generation, or they're not aware of all of it. So they may come up with an idea and they think, oh, it's brand new. And actually it was written about 25 years ago. So we're in this unique situation now where we've got a star to steer by, so to speak, but we need to be aware of on whose shoulders we are relying to do good work in the future.
Yes, I'm repeatedly hampered by the very horrifying discovery that St. Augustine stole nearly all of my theological insights. It's just unconscionable. I don't know how we could do that. Every single time I think I've got something clever, it's usually in Augustine somewhere.
That's right. And thank goodness for St. Augustine.
Yeah, those are definitely some very interesting areas. I think I would add my bonus one would be I foresee lots more interest in Lewis's friends, his influences, in both directions, and it's been very gratifying to see more work done on Humphrey Havard, Owen Barfield being reassessed. And there are a number of works that I know are slated to come out to try and introduce people to Charles Williams, because terrifyingly complex character. But the interplay of all of those influences is certainly something I found interesting. And whenever I've been introduced to a new member of the Inklings and their friends, like Dr. Diana Gleyer's letters from Blanche Biggs to Warren Lewis, it's like, here's another amazing person to learn about. Yeah. But let's stick with his categories. And who are some of the people that you've got writing essays on these different areas?
Well, we have Walter Hooper. This was one of Walter Hooper's last essays. I was amazed when he died, and we all still feel the loss of his presence. But when he died, he had left me 2 essays to edit. So one made it into this volume, another made it into a volume of Sehnsucht. So that's very interesting, looking at Lewis's early involvement in a Oxford literature discussion group when he was studying at Oxford. But besides Walter Hooper, we have Michael Ward, we have Diana Pavlik-Glyer, we have Mark Knoll, Marge Mead, Mark Neal, Wayne Martindale, Steve Beebe, Monica Hilder, David and Crystal Downing, Laura Schmidt, now Laura Stanifer, James Como. So a lot of very good
heavy
scholars.
Hitters.
Yes. So it was amazing that we're all able to do this. It took us quite a while. After I began this work, people advised me, well, the last thing you ever want to do is do a memorial volume. It just takes forever, and it did take forever. But one wonderful thing is because it took forever, when it finally was published, it was the 70th anniversary of Mitchell's death. So it came out in the year in which, had he lived, we probably would have been putting together a memorial volume for him. So that was wonderful. And through this, of course, we had kept from the Mitchell family the fact that we were laboring on this. We wanted it to be a surprise. We didn't want to surprise them with an idea and then find ourselves unable to fulfill that dream. So we waited till it was about to be in print, and then we let them know what was happening. And that was a sweet moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's lovely. That's lovely.
Now, David, you had mentioned a bonus category, and I would add my own bonus category to what Mitchell did, and that would be technical studies of Lewis. This is where you look at alternate readings or alternate versions of Lewis text. They're published one way and then it's later corrected. You can think of Paul Ford's early work on that, comparing different versions of the Narnia novels, the Narnia children's books, between American and British versions. Well, there are other differences like that you find in Lewis. Yeah. Yes, right.
I was horrified when I first saw that. I didn't know about that until I moved to the States.
Yes.
Everyone just kept talking about the chief of police and gave him a very weird name. That's not his name.
That's right. That's right. There's actually a version of the Screwtape Letters that was published that tried to put that whole setting of the patient in the United States rather than in Britain. And that is just horrifying. So, but most people don't know things like that. It's hard to find information on that. Or another example of technical approaches to Lewis material is, of course, what is done with Lewis handwriting analysis and trying to find differences in how he wrote in different years, different decades. That's a very technical thing.
Yeah. Charlie Starr is quite incredible. I would not have the patience for that. Just wouldn't.
And he's always coming.
I'm on the cusp of the millennials, and I kind of get angry whenever I have to read a handwritten note rather than somebody sending me a text or an email, or at least a letter that's printed. So the idea of laboring that long with somebody's handwriting so that you can not only read it but identify from the shape of the R that this must have been in the summer of 1942. That blows my mind.
Yes, and in graduate school I studied, among other things, paleography, and now handwriting is now paleography. It's beginning to be a lost art to understand that.
Yeah. Well, would you mind just picking one or two things, one or two essays in the book, just to give people an idea of the sort of thing that the scholars are unpacking about these other areas for future study?
Yes, well, the first chapter, Guns and Good Company, Lewis in the First World War, by Grayson Carter. He uses what is becoming a more common tool for war historians, and that is to look at the diaries of people that served in war and using that to compare with the official records and then give some more nuance to what's going on. So Grayson Carter discovered a diary by somebody that served in the Somerset Light Infantry in the time that Lewis was involved in that military unit, and in some of the engagements that Lewis also was involved in World War I, and that's given a different flavor to understanding his war experience. Also, more detail than we've had before on Lewis's early recovery from his wounds and where that happened and things like that. So that's very interesting, using the current techniques of historians and historians about World War I, applying that to Lewis. So I think that was very fruitful. David Downing's contribution is an example of an older study on Lewis that was republished for this volume, just to give a sense that there's good older work done. So there was a piece he did on the character of Merlin in That Hideous Strength, and how Merlin has to be redeemed. His soul has been harmed by involvement with magic, and it takes somebody like that to be the conduit for the powers that have to come and set things right on Earth. So very interesting, and of course, everything that David Downing writes is very readable and engaging. So
Particularly
that's
his stuff
wonderful.
on the Ransom trilogy. And fun fact, I actually read That Hideous Strength for the first time this week because my brother-in-law wanted to do among I've got quite a few brothers-in-law, all local, and we
Yes,
have a book club. And one of my brothers-in-law said, "I really want to do That Hideous Strength," and he just assumed that I'd read it. But I was trying to sort of keep it box fresh for when we do it in season 9 of Pints with Jack. But there was absolutely no way that I was now going to be able to do that. But great book. Really enjoyed it. Nutty
right.
ending, but really enjoyed
Mm-hmm.
it.
I should mention that we have 3 chapters in the Undiscovered C.S. Lewis that focus on related authors. So Kristen Jeffrey Johnson has done a wonderful chapter on George MacDonald and the beginning of a discipline called English literature. And we
Yeah.
think it's something that was studied for centuries, and it's not so. And talks about George MacDonald's primary job, day job, being as a teacher, which Lewis did not know, and many people do not know, and how he was involved in lifting up that as a good topic. English literature is a good topic for academic pursuit. I think that was very helpful. Crystal Downing has done one that focuses on the correspondence between C.S. Lewis and Dorothy Sayers in World War II and post-war, and just the interaction and the it's almost a boxing match at times between these two great minds, and she illuminates that for us. And then Laura Schmidt Standifer has given this marvelous ending to the volume, which is on the longing for the true West in Tolkien's um, writing and his whole legendarium. And what a great way to end a volume on Lewis with the idea of longing.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've been very pleased with how it's all come together, and now is available for other people to catch a sense of where we are headed in Lewis scholarship.
Wonderful. Well, those are a number of broad category areas for people to work in. What are you yourself working on? What do you see as some projects that are in the near term that you're going to be working on related to Lewis?
I'm trying to finish up my book on C.S. Lewis and his work with the Royal Air Force Chaplains Branch in World War II.
Mm.
So something that maybe people have heard of, but they don't know very much about. So I've spent the last 12 years researching that, mainly in London, going through the records of the Royal Air Force, or in different locations, and discovering where Lewis spoke and what did he say, and encountering Lewis having a rough go at it as he starts with the RAF.
Mm.
His first lecture at RAF Abingdon, it's a failure, and he doesn't realize he's done a poor job with it. It's worse than being a failure. So you can imagine, Lewis writes to a friend, Sister Penelope. Well, I hear that you've just started working with the Royal Auxiliary Air Force. I'm working with the RAF, and maybe we can compare notes. And a couple of days later, he writes the same friend and says, apparently my first talk with the RAF was a complete disaster, and I await the decision of the chaplain in chief. And you think that both letters were, one letter was written before Lewis talked and one letter written after. No, they were both written after. So Lewis doesn't realize that he's done a poor job. But he figures it out, and he has other setbacks. He tries to do a appeal to the heart in 1942. That does not go well. Nobody responds, and Lewis begins understanding he's not going to be an evangelist, but he can be an apologist, and he
Mm.
begins honing that skill.
I think it was in Philip Ryken's book. That was the first time that I learned that there was kind of like a pairing that would start to happen. He would sort of come in and deal with the intellectual objections, then he would have a little bit more of a hot gospeler kind of appeal to the heart person, then come in after him.
Right, and we have several examples that can be documented of this. And Lewis saying, this is actually quite effective. Lewis mentions doing that after a film has been shown, after hymns had been sung. Lewis comes and does the intellectual side, the head stuff, and then somebody else does the heart stuff. So it's really Lewis learning what he can do and what he cannot do well. So that's the book. I finished a second draft of that. The current chaplain in chief has been gracious enough to write the foreword to it. So hopefully that will all be finished up sometime this year.
Oh, that's great. I'm really pleased you're doing that, because that formative part of Lewis's life, it just makes so much sense of everything else that came afterwards. It was like in the essay Transposition, and in his, when he was addressing seminarians, he keeps coming back to this idea of translation, that you need to be able to communicate people to people in a language they understand. And if you're not doing that, you're wasting your time. So if you're going to if you're going to offer a lecture on the soteriology of St. Paul to a bunch of fighter pilots who are about to risk their life and limb for their country and their family, you maybe want to change up how you actually communicate that to them.
Exactly. And there's actually a wonderful story in Palm Sunday, 1943. Lewis is not with fighter pilots, he's with bomber air crews. And he goes to speak at two church parades, mandatory formations in the morning, and then in the evening he goes to voluntary services in the chapel at RAF Feltwell. And the chaplain he's working with says, Lewis, you realize that anybody that comes to hear you for a voluntary meeting, they're going to be harassed by the other people in the squadrons, because military uniformity is the way to go. And if you stand out in any way, you'll get harassed. And Lewis says to the chaplain, well, maybe I'll say something about what it cost me to be a Christian in Oxford. And then Lewis begins with at the text that he'll be talking on. If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. And then Lewis gives the closest we ever find in Lewis to an exegetical sermon. He preaches on that text, and he preaches on Christ on the cross and what it meant. And you think Lewis begins talking about what he had experienced, and he doesn't get this personal usually in his public talks. But to these men, many of whom would not make it through the end of the war, he becomes more vulnerable. It's a really sweet thing that happens. Here's an old war veteran pulling back the curtain about what he's going through and this shared suffering that they both experience as people who know war. It's really quite a story.
Wow. So where is this recorded? How is it available? Is it from these RAF records that you've been looking at? Do they have transcripts of what was said?
No, we have one complete talk that he gave, and that's the talk he gives in the morning at RAF Feltwell in a satellite station, and that becomes the first chapter in book 4 of Mere Christianity. Then we have so we have what other chaplains who work with Lewis, what they recorded, what they remembered of different talks. We have that. We have some titles of Lewis's RAF talks without anything other than the titles, and we can compare those to different chapters or sections of Mere Christianity. And then the third book of Mere Christianity, the third series of talks, was broadcast not on the normal BBC radio, but on the Forces program, a separate radio station just for people in the military. And Lewis's instruction for that third series was, give us something like you would say to the RAF if you had a series of talks with them. And then one last category, we have Lewis's altar call that he gives in September of 1942, or August, very end of August 1942. So we've got the notes of that were published during the war. So putting all those together with dates from RAF records, and of course the correspondence, Lewis with his friends, Lewis with different chaplains, and you put that all together and you have a story. It's something like doing an archaeological dig and getting bits and pieces and trying to put that together.
Wonderful. Well, we've got a few more minutes before we need to wrap up. Would you mind just talking about any other projects you're involved in, as well as the work of the journal and where people can find out about that?
Yes, the journal now you can find out about Sehnsucht. It's all open access now on Digital Commons. So if you go to, you just Google Sehnsucht C.S. Lewis Journal, you'll find the Digital Commons site through George Fox University. It's also available in print and EPUB and hardback through Whiffenstock Publishers, who makes it available through Amazon and all the other realtors. And same for the Undiscovered C.S. Lewis, which is published by Wing Lion Press. That's available through Amazon and other distributors, as well as through Wing Lion Press directly. One last thing I'm involved in besides those things, because why should life be boring? I'm involved in the C.S. Lewis Correspondence project, which was just announced this fall. We're trying to get a digital library of all of the extant C.S. Lewis letters. It's a 30-year project. There's no glory in that at all, David. It's just we modeled it after a project that was started for the Charles Darwin letters in the 1970s. Nobody even remembers who started that, but it's been going on ever since and not quite finished. And we expect this will take a long time. But we've been given initial permission from the C.S. Lewis Company and from everybody else that needs to say yes to that to begin our work. So we've got a team of 7 people from 4 different countries, and a lot of work ahead on that.
I'm very curious about that in terms of licensing. Will it become public domain, or is it just that the texts now will be available through a website that you guys host?
We're not even at that point. We're at the point of figuring out, okay, for instance, you want it to be something you can search. Let's say you want to find out every letter that Lewis wrote to somebody in Australia. Well, you have to make sure that you have the correct term for that can be used and searchable. You have to go to a worldwide database of what terms do you use for Australia, New Zealand, what terms do you use for different occupations. Did Lewis write professors of different subjects? Well, you have to have, well, what will you call that subject? You can't use 2 different terms for that. You have to use one single term. So there's a lot of metadata things we have to sort out. There are software issues, making sure you can transfer data. The software you begin with is not the one you're going to be using 30 years from now. So you don't want to type in everything again. So a lot of technical issues. Besides all the legal process, if you get permission from the C.S. Lewis Company, do you have permission from the person that owns a particular document? And what if somebody sells that document? So we've got a legal team involved and transcription team. They will have a notes team involved on annotations to different letters. Yeah, it's a big mess, but worth doing.
Well, I asked for a few reasons, but one of them is about once a month I get an email from a listener saying, "Hey, can you get HarperCollins to reprint Volume 3 of C.S. Lewis's collected letters?" Or that's usually the question that ends it. It's after a big long rant about how annoying it is that it's so expensive. And so I just thought, it's like, well, if there's going to be another project that's going to do this, we could maybe like bring out a new version, because I've tried in vain to get HarperCollins to at least take my call and to actually print out a new volume, because I think at the most basic level, I think I could probably get them a few thousand people that definitely want it.
Yes, so they've run the numbers at HarperCollins, and it doesn't make financial sense for them to reprint those volumes. Walter Hooper worked to try to get them to reissue maybe a 5-volume set, a new set, and that wasn't deemed financially feasible as well. So whatever's done in the future has to be some digital version, and figuring out how do you do that. So first, you just have to start collecting and documenting what's there. Mm-hmm. Where are the actual letters, if they've survived? What libraries around the world? Documenting, then going back and double checking transcriptions on those letters, and then getting the metadata accumulated. Yeah, it's a long project. So no glory. No glory.
No.
My own name associated with it will be long forgotten one day, but the project will go on.
I've had a few chats with James Talbot from the Digital Tolkien Project, because both of us work in IT related positions, and we've had long talks about all of the problems that you have to try and solve when you're doing something like this.
They are legion, all these problems.
Yes. Wonderful. Well, Bruce R. Johnson, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, David. Cheers.
We'll cheers in a moment, but is there a website or anything else that people can go to find you?
I think just go to the Digital Commons website of Sehnsucht, the C.S. Lewis Journal, and find me there.
Perfect. Well, viewers, please join us again next time, and we'll continue going further up and further in. Cheers.